this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. 28 years. 28. That's a long time. It's almost 3 decades. Almost 3 decades of not knowing who. You know me. I'll never bite on the idea of why, because I don't know that that's even measurable. I don't know that that's even something that we could begin to assess. But it's been almost 3 decades since the 6-year-old girl was found murdered in the basement of her parents' home. There's still many questions other than why. I think probably things that are more salient, like the who. Who did this? Because whoever they are, they were an absolute monster. We're going to revisit this case once again. The JonBenet homicide. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I had fired off an article to you that was published by BuzzFeed, and I found it interesting in the wake of, and you and I in the first episode had already talked about how we've heard about this case for so long. I think both of us had to be drug kicking and screaming in front of the televisions to watch the documentary. This is not something that we would have necessarily chosen to do because it's just we live it day in and day out. Neither you nor I spend our time watching true crime stuff, but I think that we were compelled to do this, just to try to understand, maybe another view, and trying to get an idea as to what new information had been developed. I don't know that there's necessarily new information. I think that it's a reexamination of what could be. And perhaps that's the most hopeful thing in all of this.
I watched it for the same reason, Joe. I wasn't planning on it. I was not planning on watching it. I felt like the reason we can't solve it is because they messed it up. They, being law enforcement, messed it up from the very beginning. And that prevents solving the case. Yeah. And I still, after watching this, still feel the same way. But I really watched it because I am so jaded and I have a certain way of looking at things. And nothing you say is going to change it, kind of thing. I've tried to change from that attitude. I used to have that all the time. And I've tried changing that attitude of, well, let me see. Okay, you say, there's an inspector here with a great track record who claims he believes there was an intruder that came into the Ramsey home. And I think I'll leave it at that because he thinks there's evidence proving that somebody came into that home. My problem with that is you've got a 6-year-old child who was murdered. You have a note, a ransom note, written after she was dead. You leave the body behind, but leave the ransom note. And the ransom note is actually no good when they find the body. So threatening, if you don't do exactly what we say, when we say it, that we're going to kill your baby and the baby's dead in the house, it makes no sense. If JonBenet Ramsey had been murdered and removed from the home and a ransom note was left behind, then you might have my attention, in terms of believing what else you want to add to it. But I believe there might be some truth in that. You could prove an intruder came into the house. You could prove an intruder came into your house last night, Joe. I could show how that back window at your house that I've never seen was opened and that there's a footprint right over here. And somehow, I can go into my garage. You know what I found in my garage, Joe?
What's that?
In the bricks, it's a garage. It's actual garage. It's not like a closed-in room or anything else, although it could be. A gun, a 9mm gun, pistol. hidden in my house, in my bricks. Okay. Just down there in the cinder block. Somebody put it there. I don't know who or why, but I found it.
Holy smokes.
So I didn't put it there, but if I was to be investigated and they saw that, what in the world? Dave's got a hidden gun. No, I do
Hang on
not.
1 second. I'm taking notes.
Yeah, go ahead and take notes. I'm saying it right now on this show because believe me, it scared me. But I guess my whole point is that the detective says he believes somebody broke into that home and did it in this window in this fashion. And it was downstairs in the train room and all this. And even though you can make me believe that, even though physics will prove that a baseball cannot curve in midair, I can throw a curveball. I believe somebody could crawl through that window. I just don't believe they did.
Right. Yeah. And that's you think about access, and going back to the window, one of the things that Mr. Ramsey has always talked about is that he had to knock that glass out because he forgot his keys. And that's talked about, in the documentary that, you can see on Netflix. That he had to knock that window out, and for whatever reason, it had never gotten repaired. There were still glass shards, that were visible, and of course, the suitcase that was found immediately adjacent there that had dirt on top of it, a deposition of dirt. I've had many questions about that, as far as how well was, with what care was that suitcase treated? During that period of time, how careful were they? Because, just the crime scene image that you see loose dirt sitting on top of it. Was that soil sample that was on top of that, was that consistent with maybe that kind of loamy soil that you have adjacent to a home that is not necessarily native to that area? Like if you go out to Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever you get your garden supplies, that stuff that comes in bags that you churn into your soil in order to create, a flower garden or whatever. Is that the point of origin? Because that stuff is not necessarily native to Boulder, or was the soil that they found there, did they do a geological assessment of that soil? Because there are people in trace evidence that can do that. And then what type of footprint or shoe print may have been there, and how well did they document that? I think that those are all very important questions. Early on, and going back to this article from BuzzFeed, she kind of made an obvious statement in this, and she talked about the I guess the anger that was directed at the parents, throughout this process of the early investigation, and that there was, I'm putting words into her mouth, this is not necessarily coming from her, but speculatively, people are looking for someone to blame in a case like this, because this little girl was taken to heart by the United States. The viewers that were out there, they were just eating this stuff up, and they do, want answers. I think that most reasonable people would. And so that anger is directed back. And of course, this goes along with what we've talked about in the past, hasn't it? You always look at the people in the intimate circle of the victim and who has access, opportunity, and motive, to facilitate or to pull something off. And in this case, you just take that template and apply to this access and opportunity. Well, you think about people that are, that have access to her, who could have had the knowledge that she was in that house, the opportunity that goes to time, motive, don't know. And, as Nancy always says, she's like our Yoda, I guess, to a certain degree. And Nancy, just you don't have to plan motive. You don't have to prove motive in court, and she's right. You don't, but it gives investigators, an indication of who might be involved, not the why, but the who. What's the motivation behind, wanting to rid the world of a 6-year-old child who seemingly, is a good kid, I don't know how you would make that assessment of a 6-year-old. I guess you could. People can say, well, a child is bratty, or a child is sweet, or a little angel on earth, or the devil incarnate. But you don't really know a lot about a child when they're 6 years old, because certainly children's personalities change. But by all measures, she was a sweet child. I don't know that my opinion has necessarily changed that much. Not that I necessarily have formed a complete opinion about the case. And a lot of that goes to the absence of forensic evidence, because that's where I dance. I question, I think, more what the police did or didn't do, rather. That's really, where my assessment comes from. As far as being able to get a feel for the Ramseys, Mr. Ramsey has always come across as, he's not necessarily a cold fish, but he works in a world of numbers, and I don't expect him to still, after all these years, to be running about, rending his clothes and pulling his hair out and, screaming to the heavens. But, he didn't do that early on. I mean, he showed some emotion. He cried and that sort of thing. As far as Patsy goes, hard to say. I think that she, in her own way, she was a very driven person herself, and she's certainly committed to having JonBenet out on the stage. I think that to a certain degree, and certain people who've talked about this, that Patsy had lived this life of where up in West Virginia, she had been a beauty queen up there, and maybe she was vicariously living through her daughter, her 6-year-old daughter. But beyond that, I can't really make an assessment of her. Now, I've met John Ramsey. I've spoken with him, and he was a very obliging gentleman. He was friendly. I didn't spend enough time with him to say that, he's a warm soul or anything like that. But I did spend time with him on set and talked directly to him about DNA evidence, and talked about what had happened at the scene during that period of time. We didn't go into a lot of the detail because, on these shows, you don't have, particularly if you got a big panel, you don't have like an exhaustive amount of time, like you do in a documentary, to go into great detail. And I think that the people or persons that were involved in this knew John Ramsey very, very well. I will say that. They have to have. If you were to connect him with this very personal information about his bonus, that note, access to this home, understanding the layout of this home, there's no other kind of conclusion you can kind of arrive at, because somebody didn't just like blindly walk through this house and all of these things fall into place. And then the leaving behind of the kidnapped victims, deceased remains at that point in time. They know John Ramsey. They know him very well. And I guess that leads us all the way back. It's kind of circular, it leads us all the way back to who. And I think that list is very, very short. And that's one of the surprising bits to this. When you begin to think about this kind of geographic isolation that this family experienced as a result of having not lived there for a long, long time. They didn't have this huge network of friends that extended all over the place in Colorado. Back in Atlanta, they would have. But, there's very few people that they actually had day-to-day contact with, and you didn't have time enough to develop a relationship with a lot of people. So that list is very short, particularly as it applies to Boulder, Dave.
Interesting that while you have this supposed kidnap and a 911 call before 6 a.m., that they have friends, air quotes, friends, that are there providing support in the home. that morning, the day after Christmas. And I was thinking about that from my perspective. I would not want anyone in my home.
No.
I'd want police. Here's what we know. Get it. And granted, that's my way of thinking. I also, we apply these things and what happens to how would I have dealt with this? And we kind of project ourselves into the situation. And as people who cover these stories, I analyze everybody's behavior, from the police to the victims to the suspects. I look at all of that, and none of this makes sense. But when you add in, we were told of the strangulation, that she was strangled. That's what we, as the media, as the public, we were told. There was not a lot said about the other injuries that she suffered that could have been fatal. We weren't told of those, which makes me wonder, why were we not made aware of this? On top of that, did you know there's eyewitnesses involved in this?
No, I didn't, Dave.
Scott Gibbons is a neighbor. He claimed around midnight, while looking from his kitchen window, he saw the kitchen of the Ramsey residence to be lit up with lights on dim. Neighbor Melody Stanton reported that she was awoken shortly after midnight by the sound of a child's scream coming from the Ramsey residence. So we have two neighbors that are turning on lights and hearing a scream in the Ramsey residence around midnight. If you can hear that across the street, Joe, you could certainly hear it in the house. If an intruder breaks into that house and kills JonBenet Ramsey and that scream is heard at a neighbor's home, you're going to tell me that nobody inside the house heard it?
Yeah, you would think so. Who would be that numb to it that they could not have heard it from within the house? And the characterization of screams, are they merely screams, or is it some kind of vocalization of something? Like oh my God, or
have you ever heard a scared scream?
Yeah, I have actually.
It's different, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's got this kind of haunting pitch to it. And people can be surprised by things, and that is a scare as well. But I've actually been in contact with on scenes with close relatives that roll up, and a body has been found, and you hear that sound that emanates from a mother's mouth when she finds out her son's been killed, and it is that terrible high-pitched noise. It's something you never forget, and I've heard a lot of them over the years just in those circumstances alone. So yeah, and that is part and parcel of all this. You think about what went on with JonBenet and some of the things that people don't really talk about that came out in this documentary, and they use the term sexual assault, is right. That she, JonBenet was penetrated with something. That I think that one of their suppositions is that it was part of the paint stick, or
that was later used as the garrote.
Yeah, and that's a big tell here, because it's one thing for an individual to take the life of a 6-year-old, but to sexually assault a child. And I'll tell you, with the autopsy report, one of the things, if folks that are listening to my voice, if you'll think about an old-fashioned clock face, it's weird we have to say old-fashioned clock face, but a clock face, 1 through 12, right? So, and this is how we demonstrate things in forensic pathology. Forensic pathologists will use clock face all the time in order to orient people. So, and in the autopsy report itself, they talk about this insulted area at her vaginal opening that's at the 7 o'clock position. And there's a bit of hemorrhage there that was obvious, to the ME, or the the forensic pathologists when they were doing the examination. And this gives you an idea that there is something going on here. They knew that then. And that's something that, I take it for granted because, my students every semester view JonBenet's autopsy report every single semester. I use it when I teach asphyxial deaths. So they have to review it. They have to comment on it, those sorts of things. And it's part of their testing material. And so I kind of take it for granted that it seems as though we've had access to this autopsy report forever and ever. But going back to what you said earlier about how the actual diagnoses of the strangulation, that's all we knew. We didn't know anything about the head trauma. We certainly didn't know anything about, this attack that had taken place. And she's essentially, I think, assaulted, sexually or vaginally. Something has been inserted, into her. Now, I don't know really how deep that this went. If I remember correctly, I believe that her hymen was still intact, but there was some type of contact that was made on this child's body. It's a male profile that they obtained after the examination of that DNA. And I would love to know when this examination was actually conducted. I think it was like 98, perhaps, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's accurate. All the way back then, or 97. They knew back then that they had foreign DNA, and none of that information was released. But the Ramseys knew. They knew at that point in time, back in 97, and it was never put forward.
Was that shocking to you?
Yeah. Well, I think that there was no. I felt as though that this was a male event, and the reason is that it's got the binding thing, just with the torture, around the neck, and where she's been strangled with this garrote. That's something that a sadistic male would know something of, I would think. And again, my view of this is kind of colored. I mentioned to you in earlier comments that I'd made about the serial killer that used a garrote, that I worked that case, and he was all about torture. And this is. I'm not saying that a female could not have done it, could not have tortured a child with a garrote. However, these are known torture devices and homicide weapons, that there's a utility to them. This is not just like a regular old ligature. This is something that's highly complex. So that part to me pointed in a very specific direction. It's almost as if it's a male sadist, perhaps. And if I remember correctly, there was some seminal deposition, I think, on a blanket that was found adjacent, to her.
Right.
And I don't know what due care was taken with that item as well. And that's the big problem with the DNA. There is hope, though. I'll go ahead and say this: there is hope in this set of circumstances, Dave, because with and all those years ago when I was on the air with on CNN talking about this case, back during this period of time, our needs from a forensic standpoint, you would need to do a DNA profile. You would need a robust sample of blood most of the time, okay, or some other body fluid, but it would have to be robust, okay, because it's becomes depending upon how you sample it, it becomes a destructive test, Okay. And so you need enough so that you can go back. You need enough on reserve so that you can hold it back for further studies. That ain't the case no more, dude. That's just not the case. Now we're talking about touch DNA, where you don't even need a complete profile in order to facilitate this. You can use a partial and build it out from there, and that's done on a regular basis now. That's it's not the only way we assess DNA, but that's part and parcel of how we operate now. We don't expect to find, foreign blood samples that are pools of blood that are generated from the perpetrator. Now, all it requires is, did they slough skin cells? Wow. Did they sweat? Those sorts of things. And so you can retrieve that.
That changes everything.
Yeah, it really does. And I think that that's going to be the silver bullet in this case, Dave. It sounds almost like intellectual laziness on my part, I guess. Maybe, I don't know. But I think the key to all of this is going to be this DNA. And I think that there are other places where they could source the DNA from items that were collected at the home. I tell you, you want to know what one of my biggest shocks that I had in this, my reveal in this particular set of circumstances. They found a large rope, and it's not the rope that was used, to strangulate this child with, but another bit of rope that was found, and they said that the Ramseys had never seen it, and it was in an adjacent area. And you're thinking, well, how in the world would why would this rope appear, in this house? Well, I think of things like that, that bit of rope that's there, and this thing was apparently coiled and secured. They don't necessarily talk about the nature of the knots that this thing is used to be secured with. However, for me, I'm thinking again as a forensic scientist, that if you're coiling a rope, every place you touch on that rope, there's a probability, there's a chance that you can be depositing touch DNA all along the surface of it. Again, going back to this molecular evidence that would indwell these spaces, these tiny little crevices, I'd like to know where that rope is. What became of that rope? What became of all the rest of this evidence that was collected at autopsy, for instance? The ligature once it's removed from her neck, and the garrote. And here's another thing: that paintbrush that was snapped in two. Well, yeah, you've got the part that was used as a garrote, and what they're saying is they believe that it may have been used as a device to sexually assault her. But also, what's the status on the rest of that paintbrush? Was it, as a matter of fact, what's the status on everything that was in that craft box? Because you have to believe that someone went in there and they were digging for something. Well, if you're going to be digging for something and you're not wearing gloves, there's a chance you may have left something behind. Now, maybe I'm putting too much stock, okay, and the value of potential DNA evidence. However, what else do you have? What else do you have? Because right now you're down to the DNA. There's nothing else that, unless somebody has some kind of epiphanal moment where guilt just overrides every bit of judgment in their brain. They say, I've got to get this off my chest. I'm going to say that I did it and truly say that I did it. You're not going to be like some weirdo that runs off to Southeast Asia like the guy, that they famously filmed.
Mark Carr.
Yeah, that weirdo, that he, said that he had intimate knowledge of it. He had done it, and he no more did that in A Man in the Moon. Yeah. And it was, again, another attention grab. So, what are you left with? Well, I think your best hope here is going to be this deposition of DNA, going back to those precious little hands that, isn't it funny, Dave, a lot of these cases that we cover, they're some of these things are literally wound up being solved by the victim themselves. And wouldn't that be something?
Wow.
If that DNA, that unknown bit of DNA that they found, deposited beneath her fingernails, that, that's going to be the thing that eventually points us out, or that, the unknown foreign male DNA that's found within her panties, wouldn't that be something? That child's desperation to fight off whoever it was that was doing this to her, winds up telling the tale of the perpetrator, perhaps.
And after 28 years, we still don't know.
No, we don't. But I think, probably after, we'd mentioned these grand juries that had been convened and nothing, truly happened with this. One of the other points that was raised in this is that you've got this mass communications professor from the University of Colorado that it's Michael Tracy is professor emeritus, which means he's retired. In case people don't know, professor emeritus is generally an esteemed professor or tenured professor that has retired, and they still occupy space at the university. And he's been contacted by this person. This was revealed in the documentary by the name of Daxus, and that this individual was going to give him information about the case, and kind of strung him along for a protracted period of time, and that he knew graphic details about everything that had occurred. And the thing about these cases like this, they draw, flies like, like a barbecue, that they want to come in and have some piece of this, get their moment of fame and notoriety. And this has happened, you get all kinds of false confessions over the years. And generally it's the higher the profile of the case, people want to interject themselves into it. And it doesn't mean that they're altruist and they want to help. It means that they want themselves to become part of the story.
You just got to remember that Daxus was revealed to be John Mark Carr.
Yeah, exactly. and that kind of circular event that takes place, with Carr after, and I'll never forget seeing him. And listen, I'll put it to you this way. They talk about, you can't judge a book by its cover. I'll judge. I saw that guy getting off the plane. I was thinking, this guy's a freaking weirdo. You see him walking through the concourse. He's got that weird kind of appearance about him.
Yeah.
That's dissettling, to say the very least. And then anybody that would interject themselves into the circumstances where a child would be murdered like this. And listen, he's like one of the ones that we know about. Can you imagine how many other calls have come in over the years, Dave?
And how many they've had to deal with?
And not just to law enforcement. Think about all the newsrooms out there. They got phone calls because you get them all the time. I mean, I've gotten them over the years, at the ME's office, people that claim that they know special or hidden information about something.
Really?
And I would say, well, you need to go to the police department and give a statement. Here's phone number for the lead homicide detective.
Right.
And
wow.
it never works out.
Right.
Sometimes these people are mentally unbalanced. They just want somebody to talk to, but they do have a desire to interject themselves, into this narrative. But, that, kind of topping all of this off, and this goes hand in hand, she had 17 points in this article, and the last two do in fact go hand in hand because they have to do with DNA. Here we go again. They felt as though both investigators and reporters felt as though that, first off, the crime scene had been contaminated relative to DNA. I don't know what they mean by it being contaminated. Does it go to the friends all being invited over? Does it go to John touching her body and bringing her upstairs? Does it go to making coffee and having cookies, in the kitchen? Does it go to the cops not wearing gloves? And I don't know if they did or didn't at the scene to work the scene. Did they introduce themselves? into the scene, because there's boot prints that are found in the house that are high-tech boot prints that are what cops wear. So you've got that bit in there. So are people wearing shoe covers? They have hair covers, all those sorts of things. And you can't just simply say, well, they just didn't know. That dog don't hunt, man. You should have known better at that point in time. But like I've always wondered, why in the world hasn't there been a third party involved in this relative to the DNA science? And of course, where I'm going with this. I'm going with our friends at Othram. I mean, hands down. This is the typical kind of case. This is the perfect case for an organization like Othram to be involved in. Because if you still have DNA, or if you think that there is a chance that you can harvest DNA, they're the people to do it. And if they can extract that DNA from any of the surfaces, whether it's a rope, whether it's the panties, whether it's the fingernails, whether it's any kind of, whether it's this mass of blankets and everything, which, at some point in time, somebody said about seminal deposition. I don't know how to verify that. Is there seminal deposition that you can extract? What's the status on all of this stuff? Is it moldering in a back room somewhere? Or is it something that you're actually protecting after all these years? If you got this into the hands of Othram Labs, they can build out this profile now, Dave. And not only can they build it out, they turn this damn thing over to the genealogists that are on board. And Katie, bar the door, brother, because it's at that point in time that they can source this. It doesn't matter if this individual's not in CODIS. It doesn't matter. That's off the table.
Wow.
At this point in time.
Yeah, they'll find Uncle Fred.
Yeah, I mean, we have moved so far beyond the system where stuff is inserted into with CODIS. When you start to get into this forensic genetic genealogy, and interestingly enough, in 2022, I think correct me if I'm wrong.
It is.
Isn't that when JonBenet's dad, John, he solicited, for the governor, please, I'm asking. Please
let us let somebody else help. I'm thinking, exactly. Why is he having to ask the governor? You're talking in 2 years ago, the guy is begging, please let me find out who killed my daughter. This is all I'm asking. Now, this is a guy who's asking the governor to step in to allow them to take this DNA evidence and turn it over to another group that can look at it differently. And why is there a no?
Yeah, that's something that I certainly don't understand. And perhaps, and again, this is me spitballing, because I was covering this with somebody else recently. Maybe we were on Nancy. I can't remember. Anyway, the idea came up with the DNA testing being a destructive test, and is there enough of it left? Well, how much did you go through at that point in time? And you have to remember, and this is where the hope, herein lies the hope, is that you don't need as much as you used to. If I tried, I don't know that I can necessarily give a sufficient, my words are insufficient to describe to you how little you need now in order to do this, in order to facilitate this. And that, Dave, that one shot at it could be enough to finally reveal maybe not who killed her, but who was present when she died. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.